Hey guys, good evening. We are back to Project Offbeat, the podcast that we want to bring in guests from different industries that are beyond the corporate, 'di ba? Me and Matt, as you all know, corporate lives kami, no? But of course, we want to expand the perspectives of corporate professionals nowadays. That there's so many other careers and passions out there, right? So, Matt, Saturday night, and we're still doing podcasting. Di ba? Parang wala na talaga tayong tigil sa podcasting natin. How are you feeling, Matt? I think earlier this morning, by the way, mga ka-offbeat, no, nakamit namin isa sa mga guests namin before. Dating online setting lang. Kanina, na-meet namin siya in real life, right? So that is such a milestone for us. Matt, how did you feel about meeting Wilson Flores earlier in real life?
You know what? I think it's the first time we'll be having like 2 interviews in one day. Alam mo yung ganong tipong parang Project Offbeat episode na rin yung yung conversation natin kanina, but we talk for longer, like what, 3 to 4 hours. 'Di ba? Pero
exactly.
Masaya rin to meet them face to face. So I hope that we can meet our guests face to face slowly but surely, no?
For sure, for sure. Anyways, Matt, no. Disclaimer lang sa mga ka-offbeat natin. Guys, this could be the most difficult episode that Project Offbeat is really handling, no? At least in terms of topic. Throwback lang, no? Back when I was working in Meralco, I think that was 2019. So roughly 2-3 years ago. We were a monopoly, right? And people hated us for a lot of reasons. The first is being a monopoly, syempre, every time tumaas yung kuryente or bumaba yung kuryente, ikaw lang sisigawan or ikaw lang, sa'yo lang magrereklamo yung mga customers. You know, that's the blessing and a curse of being a monopoly, right?
That's true.
Number 2, why they hated us. Alam mo, napakahirap kasi intindihin ng isang electric bill, di ba? Napakadaming terms, di ba? Kung saan nanggagaling yung energy sources, paano na nakakalculate yung bill mo. It was very, very complex, right? And the last one, no, there was also a set of people, an activist set of people that really criticized Meralco, no, for the way it generated electricity, no, kung saan nanggagaling yung mga sources na yun, right? So mga ka-offbeat, ano ba ibig sabihin ko dito, no? Why am I giving you this context? Right? In today's episode kasi, we're featuring the off-beaten career of someone who may relate to me in somewhat this sense, no? We're featuring a career from the science and technology field. Matt, I wouldn't have dreamed of talking about science after I graduate. But here we are right now. Here we are right now. We're talking about science, right? And it's an obvious unfamiliarity due to our little background from it, di ba? Kami nga, siguro last naming science course was, I think from high school pa, di ba? So talagang lagi na namin siya nakakalimutan. Science and technology sounds nerdy, tough to grasp, and not many want to talk about the careers in that field. So we want to really dissect into that spectrum this episode.
Right. And Project Offbeat will gladly accept that challenge regardless of difficulty. But I hope our guest has the patience to explain it to us. No? We still want to give a lot of voice and platform to this type of careers. No? Our guest today is a science research specialist in the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, or PNRI. She is also one of the founding officers of the Philippine Young Generation in Nuclear, PYGN, an organization that aims to really promote the benefits of nuclear to the youth. She is also the liaison officer for the International Youth Nuclear Congress. We can see her influence both locally and globally in all things science and nuclear energy.
Without further ado, our guest today is wonderful science researcher Andrea Luz Nery, or we can fondly call her Oona. You know, I've always wondered why she was called Oona, no? But we can ask her that in our episode today. She joins the Project Offbeat podcast today to talk about the career of being a science researcher. Welcome to the show and good evening, Oona. Kamusta ka?
Hi everyone, good evening. So, grabe yung intro ha. Just wanna share that this is also my first time to be in a podcast. So thank you for inviting me. And ayun, let's get started.
All right. Why don't we get things started with a very light note, no? Una, saan nanggaling yung pangalan na Una? Right? You're Andrea Luz. I couldn't find you in Facebook, LinkedIn. Bakit Una? Right? Where did that come from?
It's always a great conversation starter. So the real story is my parents had no children for 8 years. And then after they got us. I have a twin sister, so my dad got super creative and of thinking about our nicknames. So I am Una because I came out first. The
Okay.
yeah, the
Ah,
spelling is just different because he based it off Charlie Chaplin's wife, Una Chaplin.
Mm-hmm.
mm,
And then my sister is nicknamed Isa kasi may isa pa. So yeah, that's
so
really the
cute.
story about it. Yeah.
Una is Isa a science researcher like yourself, or is she in a different field?
No, actually our career paths split as early as high school because I went to Philippine Science High School, which signed me up
Oh.
essentially for a life in the science and technology field. Uh, and then my sister stayed in our previous high school, and she's more of a writer, so she really went into a writing
Wow.
field. So that's why she took AB communication in Ateneo, and now
Awesome.
she's doing
Awesome.
like HR work. So it's a totally
Ganda.
different field, even if we're twins. But it's interesting how
Okay.
at least you have something else to talk to.
Thank you, Una, for that. Why that breakdown of your name and your twin sister, right? I think why don't we get it started? You mentioned you came from Pisay, right? And then you were already sort of fated to take on the science and technology field. Would you be able to lay it all out, no? What does a science researcher like yourself do? Kasi kami, exposed lang kami, I guess, in the laboratory, right? When we dissect frogs, or what else does a scientist or a science researcher like yourself do in a day-to-day, right? For our ka-offbeat.
So a science researcher depends on what specialization they've chosen. So for me, I'll focus more on my specialization, which is chemistry. So I finished a double degree in BS Chemistry and BS Material Science and Engineering at
Oh,
the
wow.
Ateneo.
Oh,
It's a
wow.
quite a mouthful. And frankly speaking, I have no idea how I was able to finish the two courses. But from there, essentially, my work really focused a lot on being in the laboratory. So dealing with when I was in our agriculture research section, because I started as an agriculture researcher,
Mm.
my work would focus on nutrient management and soil erosion assessment. I'll get a little bit
Yeah.
more into that later, but essentially, what my everyday life would look like was usually in the laboratory. I would analyze soil and leaf samples from plants to check on
Wow.
the um, potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus content in these parts of the plants. I would test soil for radionuclides just to try to get data on how to see where they came from. So if they that's just for us to get an idea of how soil eroded and how much the extent was and where it was going
Yep.
and where did it come from. Aside from that, I was also part of some projects on plant mutation breeding, quite a big word also. But that's
Exactly.
essentially that's essentially trying to change the DNA of plants using radiation
Mm.
so that we can get a better variety out of them. So, for example, we want rice that can have a higher yield, or some another plant that can make the yield come out faster, have the
Yep.
height a little shorter so that the birds don't eat it and stuff like that. So that was
Mm-hmm.
something that I used to do before. I used to manage our chemical laboratory as well, making sure that we
Yeah.
were compliant to different regulations. And then that
Yeah.
was my work for 5 years.
Why do you study these? Is it more of economical na dapat maaral natin how to make, rise faster or whatnot, no? Or meron ding kailangan na objective dun?
For plant mutation breeding, the point of the studies is to create a variety with better traits. So it can be
Yeah.
economical. For example, we used to work on ornamental plants, yung pang design ng mga plants. So we could change
Mm-hmm,
their
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
colors, how
Yeah,
they
yeah, yeah.
look like, which is a big market, has a big market of its own right now with the plantitos and plantitas that came out during the
Right.
pandemic. And then for rice and other crops, it's more for economic. It's most economic as well, so that when the farmers use it, they can get more yield and more profit out of one batch. The same for our nutrient management studies. So, for example, when we talk about nutrient management, we talk about fertilizer. So whenever we do plant different crops, we use a lot of fertilizer. So farmers will usually buy this
Mm-mm-mm.
fertilizer and then they will use it for their crops. And then with nutrient management studies, our goal is to get the best amount of fertilizer, the least amount of fertilizer that they need for a certain batch, so that they
Ah,
can save
mhm,
money on
mhm.
fertilizer from the start and still earn the same profit. So ayun, get a
Awesome.
bigger profit rather.
You
Mhm,
know what,
mhm.
Lance?
I
Parang
see.
I think this is why it's so important to have a science and technology person in this podcast for the first
Exactly.
time. Because, you never hear about these careers. When I think about scientists, you think about maybe if you go to the US. Pero now we have at least we can have this conversation where, this is the reality of science and technology people in the Philippines. And that's such a eye-opening experience, no? I just wanted to ask, no, like, from an agricultural standpoint, how did you then kind of pivot towards your now career in kind of this nuclear industry, no?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd like to add, Matt, parang
Go ahead.
how and why. 'Di ba? How and why. Kasi parang nasa Philippines ka, you'd think agriculture would be the more important matter because we're, a rice, producing country right na one of the top rice producing country.
Well, I'll start first with what we do at the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute. So, when people hear the word nuclear, there are usually two things that come to your mind. So, one is obviously energy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So, the nuclear power plant, but a nuclear power plant, Chernobyl, Fukushima, all those things. Aside from that, if it's not energy, which is the more positive word that comes out from nuclear, it's nuclear bombs, nuclear
Yeah.
weapons. So
Hiroshima, right?
yeah,
Hiroshima and
Hiroshima,
Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, yeah, all those things. And then whenever I used to take a Grab from the office, the driver would always ask me one question. Ma'am, anong ginagawa nyo dyan? Nag-aaral ba kayo ng bomba? Yung parang ganon. So that's usually like when I do this whenever I give talks, I make like I ask the participants to tell me what the first word that comes to their mind when they hear the word nuclear. It's usually those two. So when I entered PNRI, I had no idea that there were so many facets to nuclear science and technology that I'm pretty sure majority of the people who will hear this had no idea existed. So agriculture is one of the applications that we use at where we can use nuclear science and
Really?
technology, environmental studies, industrial applications, and health applications. So I could go on and on about the different studies that PNRI does. Just to give like one example, so I mentioned the agriculture research work that I did earlier. We have a very famous product now, which is the carrageenan plant growth promoter, which is
Mm.
essentially a plant for it's like a foliar fertilizer that helps rice yield increase by 30%, which is a
Oh,
big
wow.
deal in the agricultural world.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
it's made from seaweed, so we irradiate the seaweed and it breaks the polymer chains into smaller parts so that they can fit inside the stomata of leaves and enter the plant. And
Mm-hmm.
then aside from that, we've also delved into work on hemostat, hemostats, wound dressings. There's a study right now on using abaca modified stuff for wastewater treatment and a lot of stuff on environmental research. And I could go on and on about all of these things. But just to summarize, PNRI and nuclear science and technology is definitely more than nuclear power and nuclear weapons.
Mhm.
So why I'm in this field, when I was in the OST, I used to work in the central office. So when I saw that PNRI had so many applications, not just nuclear power, I started to fall in love with nuclear science and technology and how much it could help the Philippines. And
That's the dream.
that's why I'm still in PNRI until now. So um as I mentioned earlier, I was an agriculture researcher for 5 years. Now I'm in the technology diffusion side of things. I'm in our international cooperation section. So why I moved, I felt that um I was kind of stuck when I was in agriculture research. It's not a bad thing. The projects were very good, but I felt that there was a lack in the how we diffuse the knowledge and how we transfer the
Mm-hmm.
technology, because agriculture research takes years. And although it excited a lot of my colleagues, it wasn't exciting me as much. But I fell in love with the technology diffusion stuff. So I used to be active in a lot of events. I used to organize events for our youth to promote the different applications of nuclear science and technology. And now I'm in the international cooperation section. I help our researchers find collaborations, find capacity building opportunities abroad, and ayun, help them with project management in general.
Mm-hmm. You could say, Matt, na parang hindi naman pala pivot to nuclear. More of, I would say na from agriculture, she expanded to nuclear, which is, may agriculture pa rin, pero marami ng ibang applications and facets, no? And I think
Yeah, yeah.
that's already one misconception that we broke today, Matt, in this episode, right? It's more than
You
nuclear
know,
bombs.
oh, Una, in full transparency, a lot of our questions were about ano kaya yung energy, or like what is this misconception about, bombs and radiations. Pero like in the first question pa lang, how I got it was, it's not that you're using nuclear energy or nuclear power to generate these. It's not like how we see it in the movies. It's more of like applying radiation
Yeah.
to practical
Yeah.
application that you can see
Yeah.
in everyday life, which I think for me at least, like, does it have to be nuclear? Like, you can technically use other forms of radiation, right? Like, what's the difference of other radiation and nuclear?
Well, I usually start with saying that everything starts with the atom. So why we call it nuclear is because it's coming from the nucleus of an atom. So the radiation,
Ooh.
back to high school science. So how radiation happens is that we have our different atoms. We have the atomic numbers. We have different elements, and the atomic number usually equates to what element it is, right? So when we have an atom, sometimes the bigger atoms are become more unstable. So sometimes we have certain isotopes that we call radioactive. The isotope means it's the same element, but there are more neutrons in the nucleus. So because it's getting bigger because of all those neutrons, it becomes more unstable. So for the atom to go back to a state where it's not stressed, how I would call it, it needs to release energy. So the energy that's released from these unstable atoms is what we call
Mm,
radiation.
yun
So there are
pala.
different types of radiation. So you have your alpha, beta, gamma, X-ray, and all these things. We have an entire spectrum of radiation called the
Right.
electromagnetic spectrum. So some of this radiation is non-ionizing. So for example, the radiation that comes from microwaves, from your radios, from your cell
Mm.
phones is non-ionizing radiation. And the alpha, beta, gamma, X-rays are in your ionizing radiation. So what the difference of ionizing and non-ionizing radiation is, the ionizing radiation can break your DNA. It can break DNA in general.
Right.
Um, and then the non-ionizing radiation does not have enough energy to do so. That's why when
Mm.
I usually bring this up, like your parents would probably tell you not to put your cell phones near your head when you sleep because of the radiation.
Oh my God.
But that's not true. Like it doesn't cause cancer or
Thank
anything
God. Thank
because it's
God. I do that
non-ionizing.
every night. I do that
Yeah,
every
I do
night.
that every
Nag-a-alarm
night
ako
too.
eh.
Yeah, I do that every night too. And then,
Thank
yung
you,
ano din,
science. Thank you,
yung
science.
sinasabi din nila nakaka-computer mo yan. Yung ganon, I had a parent argue with me one time during a science fair saying that my kid has been getting headaches kasi kaka-computer niya or something. So it's because of the radiation from the computer, ganyan. But it's non-ionizing radiation. So it's not enough to cause cancer or anything to change the DNA. It just exists. It's just
Oh.
radiation.
Oh.
But for
Thank
ionizing
you.
radiation, we this is where all the safety and regulations come in because syempre we have to protect the people that work around radiation. Um, that's something that we have to work on. That's why we have a regulatory division. Pero ayun, that's the difference between radiation and
Mhm.
non-ionizing, the ionizing radiation rather, and the non-ionizing radiation.
Ganun
So going
pala.
back to the question, it doesn't always have to be about radiation. So for example, PNRI is not the only research institute in the Department of Science and Technology. There are other research institutes that handle different topics. So all moving towards creating solutions for every Filipino. So ayun, sa amin lang nagkataon na because we're the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute, our specialization is utilizing ionizing radiation
Okay.
to work on different projects and create different products that can benefit the Filipino people. So ayun, yun lang.
Okay. It's just the terminology of
Yeah.
it.
Right. Una, sorry, when you were trying to dissect it earlier into ionizing and non-ionizing, no, it made me wonder, how do you actually know these stuff, right? Is it all in the books, or like what is the process of a science researcher like yourself being able to break down these terms for us, the mga regular people, no, that's not exposed to your laboratories?
Well, it takes a lot of skill and learning how to
For
communicate
sure.
science. It's not easy, definitely, because I did a lot of training on the technical side of nuclear science and technology, but it's a different skill altogether to like explain it to the
Yep.
regular Filipino. So, for example, we used to do a lot of science fairs back in the pre-pandemic times. So some of us would stand next to exhibits, and people could ask us questions, and we would explain to them in like the easiest way possible. Me personally, I'm the only science major in my family, so I guess that was a lot of practice for me to learn how to explain what I do to my friends and my
For
family.
sure.
So yeah, that's probably why I learned how to explain it in layman's terms. I love talking to younger children. I love explaining these things to younger children, to other Filipino youth, high school students. They're my favorite people to talk to. So ayun, parang it's a skill, definitely, and science communication is very important, especially for our field. Na it's misunderstood. I would call it misunderstood, and ang daming misconceptions about it. So, ayun, we really need to do our best in
Yeah.
explaining it in the best way
Yeah.
possible.
Is there anyone teaching you how to communicate science, or para-paraan lang rin talaga yan, you know? You just understand it to your full extent and then try to laymanize it as much as you can.
Well, it's a lot of trial and error. As a
Ooh.
science major, even if I'm no longer working in the laboratory, I treat every project and everything that I do as some sort of experiment. So, for example, I
Awesome.
will try to explain it to someone. I will see what happens, and if it's positive, then I will do it again. If it causes more confusion for the person, or if they think that something is off or they misunderstood me, then it's a cue for me that my experiment
Mhm.
went wrong and I need to shift how I do things so that I can get the outcome that I'm hoping for. So,
Ganda.
it's a lot of
Ganda.
trial and error, syempre. And of course,
Yeah.
it's best also to learn from the good and best practices of other groups. So, for example, in the organizations that I'm part of, I work with some science communicators. So I learn a lot from them, and it's so interesting to learn about how
Yeah.
they use communication
Ganda.
to share communication skills to share science to the regular Filipino.
Una napansin ko lang that I think I've talked to different scientists and researchers before, but you're I think the first one that really wants to nail down science communication. And I think it's the first time I've heard these two terms together. Why is it so important to communicate your science technology field? Because kunwari kami ni Matt, we come from the digital technology field where we create digital products. But for me, it's not really needed to explain it. Alam mo yun, parang sort of people know what you do already. Why is it important that communication is fused with science and the technicalities of it?
That's a great question. So, science communication has been increasingly popular among the science majors. At least for the
Mm.
younger ones that I've been seeing, more and more of them are becoming more interested in science communication. So, for me, my first experience with science communication was actually in my Ateneo org life. So in Ateneo Chemistry Society, our goal was to show people that chemistry is not just located in the laboratory, but it's part of our everyday life. So that was our start of showing that science is in indelible ink, for example. Science is in different materials that you use in everyday life. So that was something that we started with when I was in college. I was lucky enough to meet people from the DOST that work on specifically on science communication. So yeah, our goal with science communication is that we don't want our researches to be stuck in the laboratory. There are different
Yeah.
types of science communication. There is science communication for fellow scientists. There is science communication for the ordinary or regular Filipinos. And
Yeah.
you have to choose a method that works for who you're talking to. So, for example, if you're talking to fellow scientists, that's usually through your journal articles, through your
Oh man.
conferences, and that's where you
oh.
can use
Oh shit.
the technical words talaga. But when you're talking to other people, not from the science field, you have to change the way that you speak. And it
Yeah.
takes a lot of trial and error. I don't think although there are a lot of practices that are being used and are pretty effective, I'm pretty sure there are still a lot of things that we need to work on so that we can make sure
Yeah.
that everyone benefits from the science that researchers are working on.
Yeah. Parang were you impressed when I think that was Department of Health? They actually utilized TikTok and they danced and then they showed up the pandemic levels and the
Yeah.
pandemic protocols. Are you doing the same thing in PNR?
We haven't tried TikTok yet. We did recently try using memes. So our latest post on our Facebook
Oh
page,
man. Yeah.
our info team used the meme. Also, we're getting a bit of mixed reactions from it, but we're seeing a lot of reactions this time as compared to our usual posts. So our usual posts were already lucky if we can get 500 reactions, but for this one,
Wow.
I think we already have 7,000 reactions. So
Wow. Mm.
people are not taking it a lot. People are taking it like differently. So there are people who are really happy that we're trying something new, but there are also people who are saying other things. But
Yeah.
for us, they wouldn't have seen the post if it wasn't a meme. So
Mm.
you
Yeah.
know,
That's
it's
a win.
still
That's a win.
it's a win. It's a win.
Una, what I'm getting from you is that, and I think it's also a big motivation why you decided to go on the podcast is because you want to break down that barrier that exists between, I guess, science and technology versus the common individual, no? Kasi parang when you think of science and technology, usually iniisip natin is yung journalist na sabi mo na technical, not as accessible, I would say, but what you're trying to do here is kind of like create that access for the common people to actually understand what it is that you do, why is it beneficial to them, why it makes sense to go through it or understand it. I guess I wanted to ask, what is your ideal, I guess, your future if, for example, people are more informed in the next 5 years, what you want to happen in your industry, as particularly for the nuclear division that you're in.
Well, for anything nuclear, our hope is that people would understand nuclear more than beyond nuclear power and nuclear weapons. Um, Unfortunately for nuclear, it's a difficult subject to communicate because of the different misconceptions that people have about nuclear. So if you just mention nuclear power to someone, you will get mixed reactions from them already because they think of different things come to mind. The first thing that they'll probably think about are the accidents, Chernobyl and Fukushima. And my hope also is that people would have more faith in our Filipino engineers, for example, because aside from the accidents that people associate with nuclear, which the just to clear, the nuclear community has learned so much from these accidents and have put a lot of measures in place so that they never
Yeah.
happen again. Um, my other thing that I would want to see in the future is that people would have more faith in the capabilities of our Filipino scientists and engineers. Because one thing that they keep on mentioning is that Filipinos cannot handle nuclear power, which I feel is such a wrong thing to say because Filipinos are so capable of doing so many things. And we
For sure.
have we have an international cooperation and we have like ways to learn from the best practices from other countries. So I believe that with the international cooperation um, things that we can do, we can learn from the people who are already successfully doing their nuclear power plants, nuclear researches, and whatnot. We can learn how to successfully run a nuclear power plant, and with the help of the
Ganda.
IEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, we can definitely we can definitely do it. It's just
Yeah.
to share. It's not
Yeah.
it takes a while for a country to have a running nuclear power plant for various reasons. But we're not going into this without any guide. The IAEA has a 19 milestone approach that a country needs to use
Ooh.
in order
Mm-hmm.
to have a running nuclear power plant. So what that means is
Mm-hmm.
there are 19 things that the IAEA will look for before they give the signal for you to be able to run a nuclear power plant. It's
Right.
not there
Ako.
to make things harder, but it's there to ensure that
Mm.
this is done in a very safe and secure
Yeah.
Mm.
manner.
My
So
Yeah.
standards. Yeah.
yeah, there are
Mm.
international standards that we have to meet before we can even run a nuclear power plant. So that's something that
Yeah.
people probably don't know. And yeah, that's what we hope that people will see is that we're
Yeah.
not going into this blindly and people are helping us.
You were mentioning earlier, diba, na parang we're not doing this blindly and there's a 19 milestone things to do first, no? Kunwari, let's say na you communicated it successfully to different career people out there like media, let's say like education, maybe the corporate world, no? Meron ba silang kunwari, naintindihan man nila, 100% they've now acknowledged it. If an acknowledged person, itutulong ba sila sa inyo in terms of expediting that? Kasi parang yun yung gusto ko i-connect right now, no? Say they, understood all of these science terms, di ba? May magagawa ba sila to make it faster? Di ba? Why do you need to, is it just an information for me to digest on, oh, it's a safe nuclear energy and yeah, thank you. Thank you, scientists, for doing that for us.
Well, for me, how I'm part of the Philippine Young Generation in nuclear. I see, for example, I call my members, um, I call them ambassadors for nuclear science and technology. That's how I describe them.
Ooh.
So it empowers them so that they can use their influence to spread the benefits of nuclear science and technology to their peers. So this is so much more powerful than just coming from us saying na nuclear is ganto, ganto, ganyan, ganyan.
Mm,
But when
okay.
they learn the benefits of nuclear power, they can be the ones to share it to their peers. because they
I
all have their
see.
own circles which they can
Ambassadors.
penetrate.
Mhm.
So even if like for example, mapaniwala lang nila yung parents nila na nuclear is good, malaking bagay na yun actually. So for example, sa akin, I used to give a talk on what to do so that we could spread
Yeah,
nuclear.
exactly.
So parang yung start syempre is to do your research. Kasi syempre kami, we do research. Pero parang sa sila din, they need to do research also to make sure na yung sinasabi din nila ay tama.
Yeah.
And that's a big deal din, di ba, for the science field. Tapos
Yeah.
after that, syempre, they share what they learned to people that will benefit from this knowledge. So for example, ito, hopefully, if we have a running nuclear plant, it will benefit everyone kasi it can make electricity cheaper. It can make sure that we have less blackouts in the provinces
Wow.
and
Oh
whatnot.
my
So
God.
that's what we're hoping for. That's why we're
Yeah.
pushing for this pa rin naman talaga. People always question why we consider nuclear, if especially in the Philippines where we're prone to earthquakes and natural disasters. But the thing is, with proper engineering designs, you can
Yeah.
create structures that can withstand these natural hazards. And with proper planning and if everything goes well, then we can run a nuclear power plant for a minimum of 40 to 60 years, and that can give
Grabe, no?
that can supply energy to the nearby community.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I'm not an expert on the economics of this of nuclear
Yeah.
energy, unfortunately, but I'm pretty sure that it's better to have more sources of energy than to
Exactly.
just rely
Exactly.
on the ones that we
Yeah.
currently have.
It will drive prices down for sure. 'Di ba? The more supply. Pucha, ngayon yung gasoline pa lang eh. Right? I
Yeah.
mean, wow.
That's what we try to drive because people always pit nuclear energy versus renewables. So the
Perfect.
argument is always like that. It's like, why can't we just rely on renewables? Why do we need nuclear? Why can't why do we need to push for this nuclear when it's dangerous? For that's what the current arguments are, right? But the thing is, we're not even supposed to be pitting nuclear versus renewables because we need both. Like there's nothing wrong with increasing the
Okay.
renewables. There's nothing wrong with increasing renewables, to be
Right, right.
honest. Like from what I believe, this is a personal opinion. We're not in a state to be choosy about our energy sources because we still have provinces that experience rotational blackouts up to this
Exactly.
day.
Exactly.
So,
Yes.
it's not even an argument right now against this energy source to this other energy source. It's about
Yeah.
including as many energy sources that we can at this point in time. So that's my
Ganda.
argument usually. Um,
Ganda.
that's what I believe, and that's why we continue to push for nuclear,
Yeah.
even despite all the opinions that people
Yeah.
have about it.
Oh, what do you say to people that says, di mag 100% renewable tayo, but di ba natin magagawa yon? I remember in Meralco, lagi sa amin sinasabi yan, bakit di tayo mag 100% hydro, colic, something
Hydropower,
energy, no? Na
Yeah,
geothermal, solar
hydropowered,
power.
geothermal, why not
solar,
adopt that
everything.
kind? Oh, bakit kailangan pa tayo dumaan muna sa nuclear? Meron bang di ba pwede lahat mag-renewable? What do you think of that statement?
Yeah, that's I've heard that all the time because well, the thing with energy right now is that every country I think is trying to hit like the reduced carbon dioxide emissions. I keep on forgetting what treaty that is. Basta the parang they're all trying to lower their carbon emissions right now. People think that renewables, like shifting completely to renewables, will fix that problem.
Wala na.
But here's the thing, like every energy source has its pros and cons. So these pros and cons are the reason why we have an energy mix to begin with. It wouldn't be an energy mix if it was all renewables. So that's why we still have coal, that's why we still have gas, that's why we still have the renewables and everything. So because of the pros and cons that each energy source has, That is why we need to include as many as possible so that para ma-balance out nila yung pros and cons ng isa't isa. So for example, I'm not anti-renewables. I would love to see as many renewables as possible, just to get that out there. Renewables are not consistent in terms of providing electricity to the cities. For example, if there's no wind, there's no sun, there are a lot of limitations to battery storage, for example. There's a lot of things to consider. They're not bad. But for
Oo
us
nga,
to
no?
think that we can run our entire country on renewables, it might not be possible at this point in time. I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's not it's impossible, but with the current technology that we have, it might not be possible at this point in time.
Yeah.
So ayun,
Yeah.
it's not
So,
fitting.
Ganda.
It's
Una,
not
let me
saying that
stop you right
renewables
there,
are
no?
bad. Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
no. Una, let me stop you right there, no. You said renewables aren't bad. You're for renewables and whatnot. I get that. Like obviously everyone here agrees that renewables are good. In a hypothetical situation where the Philippines does achieve 100% renewable in the future, maybe, would you consider nuclear power as a transition, like a transition power source?
It's
As of
possible.
now, would you say?
It's possible. Yeah, definitely.
So
My
parang it's a
dream,
transition to get to that
yeah,
100% renewable in the future.
definitely. My dream energy mix would be a mix of nuclear and renewables. So that's my
Ooh.
personal
Wala
energy
nang
mix,
coal.
the dream. Yeah, wala nang coal.
Yeah.
Because, what I keep on trying
Yeah.
to tell people who are anti-nuclear, pro-renewables only is that, our common enemy is coal. So why are we fighting each other? We should be fighting against
For
coal.
sure.
Yun lang. Pero,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's what Matthew said. Yes. If, for example, the Philippines does want to go 100% renewables and the technology by that time
Allows it, diba? Yeah.
allows for it, then why not? Why can't nuclear just be like a temporary thing? It's totally fine. That would be fine for me. But the point, like at this point in time, our common enemy is coal.
Yeah.
So it's not
Yeah.
renewables and nuclear. The pros and cons
Mhm.
actually fit together so well, and that's what we're trying
Yeah.
to drive home. But
Yeah.
it's not as easy. But ayun, I'm not
Yeah.
anti-renewables talaga. That's like just
Yeah.
getting it out
Uh,
there.
Yeah, I would say una, no, parang at least in my personal opinion, those who say that we go 100% renewable is coming from a privileged standpoint. They may have seen it from different countries adopting 100% na. Pero I mean those are first and second world countries, right? Tayo sa Pilipinas, like you mentioned earlier, sa probinsya, rotational blackouts pa. And kung nag-transition tayo to renewable, I don't know, won't that be too expensive for consumers at least in the initial? 'Di ba, yung pag-transition na yun. I guess that's why we need all of these. Kaya I remembered Meralco telling me, yung coal, I know masama yun sa environment and whatnot, pero it's the cheapest eh. It's the most
Exactly.
available right now, right? So, sa nuclear ba, would you say it's more affordable than renewable?
How I would say it is that nuclear is definitely not cheap. I think that renewables may be cheaper. But the thing with nuclear is it has a higher energy density. So what we mean by the energy density, for a small amount of fuel, it can produce so much more energy than the other sources. Na I
Mm.
don't have the graph with me right now, but the energy density of nuclear beats all the other energy sources by so much.
Ooh.
What else? It's not that renewable nuclear is definitely not cheap, by the way, because the initial investment in nuclear can be can be very expensive because of the materials needed to build the actual power plant. The fuel arguably is cheaper daw. I'm not an expert in economics, but ayun, what people meant, what I've heard from the experts is that the initial cost or the initial investment is the one that's very high, but the refueling cost is a lot lower. They're
Mm.
trying to solve this problem with a new type of nuclear reactor, which they call a small modular reactor. So
Mm-hmm.
because they're smaller, they're cheaper. That's the science behind it. But because they're new at this point, they're
Yeah.
still on the expensive side. So I
Interesting.
think over time it will become cheaper. And I think that's what they're targeting for the Philippines because you can put it on the islands. and that can supply the energy for like Palawan and the other far-flung islands. Para, kasi the problem then kasi with electricity in the Philippines, kaya the provinces have rotational blackouts kasi it's because of the ano din yung connection to the grid. I'm not I'm not an expert on this again, but ayun, parang it's hard kasi to connect the islands to the, to the bigger ones.
Yeah.
The smaller islands but to the bigger ones. The offshore
places,
ones.
no?
Kaya ayun.
Yeah.
That's why we're looking at these small modular reactors sana as the solution for that. But they're still being developed then.
Just to revisit a point that Oona mentioned a while ago, like the safety in nuclear power. I guess an analogy that you can use is that you always see the car accident, but you don't take into account the advancement in car safety. Yung parang may seatbelt, may airbag. So parang I think that's a good way. And it's such a refreshing take, no, Oona? In full transparency again, our questions were, why nuclear over renewable, when it should be asking why parang we should be nuclear and renewable versus coal or something, diba? Parang mas ano siya.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ganda, ang ganda. Having said all of this, Oona, diba? Parang tayo pala nagkaroon na tayo ng parang heated discussion, and I'm sure you have this every day, no? And yet you're still here. You're still doing this for a living. You're still doing this in your everyday career, no? Would you be able to tell us naman, in pursuing this path, even with all of its hurdles, even with all its complexities, why do you still continue to do it? Were there opportunities, no? Were there fulfillment that it brought you as a person, no? Kasi sabi mo nga, you're the only one in your family that does this, right? Maybe even in your friends, right? I mean, kami pa lang ni Matt, di kami makahanap ng scientist masyado sa circles namin. And we really had to look around before we found you, no? Why do you still do this, no? Does the world of science technology, did it bring you opportunities as well?
Of course, there were, I never thought I would end up here. Although, yeah, when I went to PSI, I signed myself up for a life in science. But, science has different facets. And I had no idea that I would end up in the nuclear science field at all. So it's not easy, I guess. But I'm always up for a challenge. So this is what brings me life. It's the the challenges that you never expected. And what fulfills me is seeing the different young people, like the increasing number of young people knowing the benefits of nuclear science and technology, and seeing them being the ones to fight for it na rin. Kasi parang when I organized a webinar on nuclear energy in 2020, we weren't even the ones arguing in the comment section anymore. That was the other youth that were fighting other youth to
That's
show
the dream.
na ito yung benefits ng nuclear. So parang it's not about us anymore. It's not us telling them anymore. It's people equip them with the starting point, where to start. This is the parang overview of nuclear, and then what can you do with it? And then sila na parang over time, when they were convinced na, sila na yung nagko-convince ng ibang tao. So for me, whenever I tell them na, thank you for organizing a nuclear event in your school, because that's something I do on my free time. I help students organize nuclear events upon request. So for example, I help some chemical engineering students create a nuclear-based event for their society. So when I see more people reaching out and asking for help for these types of talks and events, it makes me so happy to see now we're reaching the right people, and we have equipped people to ripple out this the benefits of nuclear energy to their communities.
Ganda. I think earlier you mentioned, Oona, that entry point to PSI led you to all of this, diba? And now you're still here. Para naman sa mga taong hindi makapasok sa PSI, I know how tough it is in that university or in that college or that high school, no? Sobrang hirap. Everyone tells me about it, no? How hard it is. for them naman, how would they discover the science and technology field? If you could share your own experience, right? I think based on your stories earlier, and then how would you help them discover this career naman?
Well, I was privileged to get into PSI to begin with. It's not an easy feat to get in, especially with the limited slots. But, I have a lot of friends who did not graduate naman from science high schools and still ended up loving science naman. So ayun, it's not for me that was my gateway to science, but for others, as long as they have a love for it, they have a love for research, a love for science, they want a continuous curiosity to find out what's new and discover new things, then they can definitely get into science. So for me, for example, privileged ako to get into PSI, but it's not the only way for people to get into science. And as long as you have like a science course, you can get into a career as a science researcher. So yun lang naman yung kailangan mo to get a science research specialist position. For example,
Science
it's a
course.
Bachelor of
Yeah.
Science in any science or engineering course. So for government, it's not easy also to get into government. Sometimes
For
may,
sure.
yeah, kwento ko lang. Actually, I saw the podcast of Kuya Ken Abante. Shout out Kuya Ken.
Oh.
Kuya Ken
Woohoo!
kasi was the one who introduced me to DOST. So yung kwento dyan kasi, parang by fate or by chance lang yung papasok ko sa DOST din. I was fresh out of college. Nag-post si Kuya Ken sa ASA group namin na may hinahanap na technical staff for the
Oh,
DOST
wow.
Central Office. Tapos sabi ko, nag-apply na
wow.
ako. Kasi sakto, parang gusto ko naman talaga, kasi parang yung government was something I considered. Pero ayun, at that time, parang sakto, sumakto yung timing kasi, ayun, time to before Duterte. Parang time ni Pinoy. So it was like a thing for a lot of Ateneans to go into government at that time. Tapos wala masyadong
Ganda.
Ateneans in DOST. So ayun, parang nung na-introduce ako ni Kuya Ken to yung naging boss ko, si ASEC Raymond Liboro, yun, nag-start
Mhm.
yung career ko in DOST. Tapos nung natapos na yung term, I transferred to PNRI. At first, I was a project project contractual. So I wasn't a regular employee right away. So ang daming challenges when you're a STEM worker in the Philippines, especially if you want to do it full-time. A
Yeah.
lot of us start as project hires. Tapos nag-aabang ng permanent item na pwedeng applyan. And even there, that's a lot of challenges to begin with. And it's a
Grabe.
mix of galing and suerte. That's what I always tell people.
Talaga?
Yeah.
And it's a totally different thing. So for example, like ako, it took me a few tries, I think 2 or 3 tries for me to even get the permanent position that I applied for.
Grabe.
And
And you
then
said there's not many people in DOSC at the time also, right?
from Ateneo.
Sorry.
Yeah,
Okay,
from
okay.
Ateneo. So
Okay.
for
Got it.
example, in PNRI, I am the only Atenean there, which is, a different thing, different challenge for me as well. Pero ayun,
Yeah.
it's an eye-opener for me, to be honest, to learn from other schools and other people. Pero ayun, the challenge for being a STEM worker in the government, ato talaga siya, halot ng galing and swerte. So you have to be good at what you do, but you also have to be you have to be lucky that the stars will
Yeah.
align for you to get a permanent position.
Yeah.
Kasi
Exactly.
ang daming magagaling. Yung mga kalaban ko, ang gagaling din eh. So parang if you're all fighting for one position, parang ang hirap din for them. Ang hirap din
Yeah.
for the selection board siguro to decide kung sino sa amin yung makukuha. Pero ayun,
Yeah.
parang for those who are interested sa government, I would suggest you start out as a contractual first. Parang take the
Yep.
risk na lang muna. Tapos kung
Yeah.
nagustuhan mo yung field, then stay. Try your best to apply for permanent. Tapos ayun, mas maganda na rin na you're in the institute na rin para makilala ka din for your work ethic, pakita mo yung galing mo, ganon. Tapos hope for the best na lang. Tapos try until you succeed, ganon.
Una, well, it just goes to show how great of a person you are in terms of skill, no? Parang, syempre, nandun ka na sa government. na you beat all of your competitors for that role na position. Grabe. Pero I guess Una, I have a question for you. All this time we've been talking about like what it takes to get into the government DOST, right? Paano naman kung, for example, there's a world that you didn't get into DOST? Is there a future for SNT people to make it here in the Philippines, or like do they have to go elsewhere, diba?
Definitely, there's still a space for STEM workers here in the Philippines. Unfortunately, I can't mention a lot because I have no experience in the
Right, right.
outside of the government. But I see my batchmates thriving naman in the private
Yeah.
industry. There's nothing wrong with going into the private industry just to get it out there. Kasi ano eh,
Yeah.
parang may misconception din sa iba na
But that's true. Yeah.
for you to parang evil yung corporate, parang ganon. I never saw corporate as evil eh. It's just something that I never experienced. But I never see corporate as evil
Yeah.
naman. Pero ayun,
Yeah.
ako parang this is where parang yung destiny ko was in government. Pero I see a lot
Yeah.
of science workers naman thriving in the private industries.
Yep.
So,
Yep.
ayun, it's ano lang, parang you just have to find your place talaga in the world.
Yeah. I think pag mga ganong careers, most likely the chem-engs, no, they help create the flavors in the juice, right? Some people work in
Yung mga
Unilab, to
FMCG,
create the
oo.
pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
diba? Yeah.
My initial dream was to work in one of the FMCGs, and you know,
Yeah.
when I first applied for work, I wanted to work in the ice cream sector and make flavors of ice cream. Yung ganon. So it was like, you know, chemistry, for example, for me, I'm a chemist. Chemistry is all around us. So parati naman may
Yeah.
magiging role ang chemists in every
Yeah.
everyday stuff. Kaya may role naman
Yeah.
ng scientists sa Philippines. They don't need to go out of the country. But there's
Yep.
nothing wrong with going out of the country then. Especially
Yeah,
for
yeah.
graduate studies, ganun. Ang daming
Yep.
opportunities for STEM for graduate studies abroad. Pero hope ko din
Yeah.
naman na they come back. They become balik
Yeah.
scientists and whatnot. And they
Ganda.
bring the knowledge that they learn from outside back to the Philippines.
Ganda. I guess thanks Una for really illuminating to us the science career parang status, no, or trend right now, no. I guess I want to lock down naman on specifically nuclear science research, which is what you're doing today. Nung nag-research kami ni Matt, we noticed that there's actually not much nuclear engineers, if any, in the Philippines. And please do correct us if we're wrong there, no. Why do you think this is the case, diba? I think earlier you said nga napakahirap makapasok sa mga ganitong posisyon, right? I guess first of all, bakit hindi na damihan yung position for that when it's such a big need, right? And second, is it because yun nga wala pa tayong masyadong nuclear power plants to work with? What's the reason why there's not much demand or supply of nuclear energies right now?
Well, to talk about government processes, medyo madami yung kailangan gawin na steps so that we can increase our employees. And it's not something that I can do personally. So we just have to deal with it for the time being. Parang may mga reorg, something requests sa this department, whatnot, to increase our plantilla positions, which can take years, unfortunately. Kaya ayun, parang that's something beyond our control then, but it's something we've been trying to work towards then somehow. Pero ayun, parang department-wide din yung problem eh. So it's something that we're trying to work on from what I've heard from our bosses. Pero ayun, for the nuclear engineers part, well, frankly speaking, there's not much of a need for a nuclear engineer right now because we don't have a working nuclear power plant. Pero hopefully once na magka-nuclear power plant, then mas magka-interest then for people to take nuclear engineering. If my data is correct, I think there are only 2 that I know of. And then
Two in
most
the
of them are not,
Philippines?
yeah. And
What?
well, I know 2. I know 2. And they're both not
Okay.
working in PNRI. Kasi one's a retired director. And then one is, I think, in the mining industry. If tama yung naalala ko. And then I have a good friend in PNRI who's currently studying his PhD in nuclear engineering. So hopefully when he comes back, he'll be our nuclear engineer. Pero ayun, isipin mo, that's just a handful of people. It's not naman na because we don't have any nuclear engineers in the Philippines na we can't go nuclear at all. Because there are ways to how we call it, nuclearize different courses. So, for example,
Ooh.
ako,
Mhm.
I'm a chemist, pero may training ako in nuclear science. So,
Galing.
kahit BS Chem ako parang tinapos ko ay BS Chem, ang mga nakuha kong trainings here and abroad are on different applications of nuclear science and
Yeah.
technology sa agriculture or sa
Yeah.
environmental studies. We have in PNRI, parang ang dami naming different courses. So we have biologists, we have chemists, we have physicists, we have geologists, and then we have so many engineers. So chemical, mechanical, electrical, electronics, and we all work together in different projects. So aside from that, yun, parang training lang talaga kami on specific topics on
Mm.
nuclear para maging
Mm. Yeah.
magka-competency
Yeah.
kami somehow on
Yeah.
the different projects that we work on. Aside
Yeah.
from that, there are also projects right now aimed towards including nuclear subjects in some
I
courses in
see. I
college
see.
and in the master's
Mhm.
level. So for example, UP Diliman has an MS in Energy Engineering course. So we
Yeah.
have two
Mhm.
nuclear subjects there being taught by PNRI professionals. Mapua, their Chem-Eng program now has a nuclear track. So, ayun, parang they're being trained then and they have subjects on nuclear technology. So, there are movements then towards talking to TESDA. Kasi ang nuclear plant, hindi lang naman mga scientists yung nag-work doon eh. You also have
Yeah.
technicians.
Yeah.
So,
Of course.
hopefully then, in the future, magka-test the course then kami for
Yeah.
technicians who want to work in a nuclear power plant or a nuclear
Yeah.
facility. So, ayun, that's something that, parang misconception din siya na because we don't have any nuclear engineers,
Yeah.
na we can't do
Yeah.
nuclear. Pero if you talk to
Yeah.
our mga physics graduates namin, yung mga engineers namin, they know a lot talaga in the technical aspect of nuclear energy and nuclear science and
Ganda.
technology. Kaya ayun, it's not an end-all be-all.
Mhm.
Parang it's good to have and we can push
Yeah.
towards training more nuclear engineers, especially if we can send them abroad. There are scholarship opportunities for those who want to pursue
Mhm.
nuclear engineering. So ayun, that's
Mhm.
parang hindi siya yung parang wala kang nuclear engineer,
Hindi
stop
naman
na.
kailangan.
Hindi
Oo.
na kailangan. Parang
Yeah.
it's not
Yeah.
naman na hindi kailangan, pero you only need like a few. Tapos matatakbuhan mo na yung
Yeah.
yung parang may nuclear facility na
Right.
pwede mo na itakbo. Parang ganoon.
Natandaan ko tuloy, parang I remember I asked you, what's a good designation for me to term you in the show, di ba? And then you specifically said science researcher. When I said, pwede ba nuclear scientist? Pwede ba nuclear researcher? I guess this is the story to it, right? Basically, you're a chemist, but your field was nuclear, your scope was nuclearized no on that end. Interesting field.
People would always ask me then, how do I want to work in PNRI one day. What do I do? Kasi I talk to a lot of young kids, di ba? Mga high school kids
Yeah.
kaya. So parang sabi na, Ate Una, Miss Una, what can I do so that I can work in PNRI one day? Yung practical advice sa kanila is just take a science or engineering course. Tapos, you find a way na inuclearize mo yon. So you can
Interesting.
either go to Mapua, for example, mag-chem-eng ka doon, may nuclear track.
Galing.
Parang ganon. Or mag-thesis ka na parang related sa projects ni PNRI. Pwede ka pumunta thesis advisor sa PNRI. That can be your gateway then to PNRI. Parang ganon.
Yeah.
So, it all starts with a bachelor's of science in science or engineering. And then, you nuclearize
Yeah.
it na lang. Tapos,
Ganun
PNRI will give you the
pala.
trainings naman eh. Kaya, ayun.
I guess if the kids are listening to this or watching to this, hopefully this will fuel them for the next 10 years to get to where you are in PNRI. But in particular, I want to ask about the government aspect of it. No, you mentioned a little bit about it as well. Like it's great if you love science, but let's face it. Sometimes there are things in the government that you might not like. You might not like. Are there any warnings or words of caution that you would share to them before they get into this? I guess applied for this government role or whatnot. And on the other hand, do you have any encouragement for them to say, "Uy, yes, go apply for this. Go for the parang kahit government man yan, these are the benefits or whatnot."
Well, I'll start with the words of advice. Government work can be challenging especially with the different things in place. So you have to have a lot of patience if you want to enter government. There are a lot of challenges. Pero very fulfilling kasi ang government work eh. Kasi parang alam mo yung ginagawa mo, it's for service for the Filipino people. Or you're creating stuff, you're doing
Yeah.
research for the benefit of the Filipino people. So parang if you really want to be of service talaga, that's government is the best way to go. Pero yun nga, ang sasabihin ko din, ang government is not for everyone. It's a different set of challenges that you have to be up for. Pero ayun, parang it's not impossible. Tapos if you really want to get into this type of field, go into the government, ayun, parang it's siguro additional advice if you can find people in the government to talk to who can give you specific advice for the specific branch of government that you want to go into. They can point you in the right direction on how to apply. Aside from that, yun nga, for me, for DOST in general, it's good to start as a contractual first because that's an easier way to get in. Aside from, the kamag-anak connection chuchu, which, I was not privileged to have. Kaya I went the harder way. And then if at first you don't succeed talaga, try again. Kasi kahit ako, nakapasok na ako sa PNRI, for example, na regular ako, kahit yung promotion ko, hindi na naging madali eh. Parang ang daming rejections then that came my way. Pero yun, hindi ka lang dapat matakot ma-reject. Try lang and try. Tapos remember lang talaga that government work is halong galing and swerte. So, ayun. Galingan mo, pakitang gilas ka. Tapos, kung mag-align talaga sa'yo yung stars, ayun. It's for you talaga.
Unang tandaan ko when we guested si Ken Abante, no? Sabi niya, bakit siya nasa government pa rin? Or bakit siya, doing this work, no? Scaled impact eh. Alam mo yun, parang makagawa ka ng isang policy, do you know how many people would affect that, no? And in that light sa'yo rin, di ba, makapush ka lang ng isang, I don't know, like a journal article that changes the way we, do rice or whatever, di ba? Parang, shit, like, I know we can't, me and Matt from the corporate, no, I know we can't do that. We can only do it probably in the company setting, pero sa government, iba talaga yung scale ng magagawa niyo for service, no? Interesting.
So if anyone needs encouragement to get into the government, go talk to Oona, talk to Kenneth Abante, listen to our episodes, and you're set.
I'm closing already this portion of Offbeat, no, with our usual ending question, Oona, no, parang we did Project Offbeat for our fellow corporate professionals, like to open their minds to careers like yourself, no, na nasa government, doing science, right? Chemist, diba? All of these careers that they may not be exposed of, diba? For you, Oona, how do you think is your specialization or your career valuable for the corporate professionals that are listening today? Let's just say they're not interested to change careers, but they're interested to listen to different point of views, no? Bakit mahalaga yung ginagawa ng career ninyo, at least for these guys?
Siguro I'll just go into the applications of nuclear science and technology. You don't need to be working in the government. You don't need to be working in PNRI to benefit from the products or the technologies that will be able to develop or are currently developing right now. You don't need to work in PNRI to be an advocate for nuclear energy. And as long as you help us, and parang even if you're a corporate person right now, if you're listening to this podcast and you hear and you're convinced that nuclear energy, for example, is the way to go for the Philippines or is a potential source of energy for the Philippines, and I hope that you'll also spread the word and tell your friends, tell your families about it, and that will be a big help for the nuclear science field, and hopefully we can have a nuclear power plant in the future. So yun.
Ganda. So mga nakikinig na nalista na ni Oona yung applications for it, right? So hopefully we can achieve into that future. Oona, we'd like to thank you for taking us off the beaten path tonight. I've learned so many things. I'm now seeing nuclear in a new light. It's
Same
not
here,
just
bro.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki, right? It's not just Hiroshima and Nagasaki, bro. It's so much applications. There's so much need for it as well, right? Energy mix, right? Before I thought there's a world of 100% renewable in maybe a few years. I guess ni pa tayo on that end, right? That energy mix is very, very important as well. Una, let people know where you are right now and what you're excited about in case you want to plug in anything for our listeners.
Well, you can find me on Twitter. I'm at Oona Nery. You can find me on Instagram at Oona Nery also. Please follow the organizations that I'm part of, the International Youth Nuclear Congress and the Philippine Young Generation in Nuclear. If you're interested to be a member of PYGN, we have a Google form on our Facebook page. So ayun, you can sign up. It's free.
Awesome, awesome. Definitely, we're most likely signing up. I think I did follow it already in my research too on this end. I watched all of your live stream videos. Please watch that too. I learned a lot. Una's slides are pretty simple. Okay, even for non-science geeks like. Okay, Una, what for you is taking the off-beaten path? Usually ito yung mga closing namin, di ba? You mentioned buong pamilya mo, di ba? Hindi naman nag-scientist, pero what for you is taking this kind of path that no one really went towards to?
Siguro it's not just about being offbeat. For example, I could definitely have gone into corporate. It would have been totally fine. But
Yeah.
my calling was, and I guess my destiny was different. And the stars just aligned for me in a different way.
Oh,
So ayun, parang I always try to look for what my purpose is, what I can do to help the world. So ayun, I found it here in government, and ayun, yun lang naman. Parang go to where God is calling you and where the
oh,
signs are pointing, and if it's the right way to go, you will find out naman later on.
grabe. That's science and religion right there in one sentence, right? Uh, thank you, Una, for taking us off the beaten path. Thank you, everyone, for listening to our show. If you liked our show, follow us as well in Facebook, IG, LinkedIn, and YouTube for exclusive content. That's at the Project Offbeat. Kita kits everyone sa next episode, and here's to taking the off beaten path. Bye, guys.